This podcast contains graphic content and may not be suitable for all listeners. Listener discretion is strongly advised.
True North True Crime is produced on the territories of the Coast Salish people.
Well, I didn't know Derek, and it's been an absolute honor to get to know him through his story, through Phil, through his eyes, through his knowledge, through people that I've talked to in the community who just loved him because he was a lovable kind of guy. Derek, he was your brother, your best friend, that whole rhythm, a father, a son, a brother, a human, just like you and I. He had family addictions, absolutely. Abuse, abandonment, personal choices that led Derek to a life of suffering and numbness, essentially. But there's no different value placed on our citizens. We're all equal. We're all human. We're all valuable. And Derek was loved. Derek believed in aliens and investigated theories around aliens. He was intelligent. He was kind. He gave you everything that he had. He wanted for nothing. He sought for peace, and all he wanted was unconditional love. He was a good guy.
In 2016, a 51-year-old man disappeared from Stratford, Ontario, a town known for its world-renowned theater and arts, but also a town grappling with a not-so-hidden methamphetamine problem. He was a familiar figure in the town's shadows, battling addiction and navigating the harsh realities of life on the streets. When he vanished, it sparked an official investigation, but despite initial efforts, the case went cold, and his whereabouts remain unknown. Rumors of foul play spread quickly, with some suspecting he was murdered, but no solid leads ever emerged to confirm what happened. Though the investigation stalled, a small group of people refused to give up. They continued to advocate for answers and keep his name alive, determined that his story will not be forgotten. This is the story of Derek Ritzy Ritz, and you are listening to True North True Crime.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to True North True Crime. Thanks so much for joining us. Whether you're a longtime supporter of TNTC or a new listener, we want to let you know that we're glad you are here. We have a lot of ground to cover in this episode, so without further ado, let's just hop right in.
In this episode, we are covering the 2016 disappearance of 51-year-old Derek Ritz, who is also known as Ritzy. Derek was last seen walking near Stratford, Ontario on or around New Year's Eve 2016, and he has not been seen since. Ritz is described as 5 foot 11 inches tall, 170 pounds. He has shoulder-length brown hair that is often messy. He has brown eyes and a tattoo on his right forearm of a woman with a snake. Derek may have been carrying an orange backpack. He is known to frequent Sebringville and Stratford and usually travels on foot. Anyone with information on what happened to Derek is asked to call Stratford Police at 519-271-4141. Anonymous tips can be submitted through Crime Stoppers at 1-800-222-8477. You can also visit Please Bring Me Home for more information on this investigation and to find their anonymous tip hotline by visiting pleasebringmehome.com/cases/Ontario/Derek-Ritzy-Ritz. We put this episode together using very limited publicly available news articles. There's not a lot out there about Derek, as he was living with no fixed address at the time of his disappearance. So to inform this episode, we spoke with Kerry, who is an investigator with Please Bring Me Home out of Ontario. We also want to acknowledge Shelley Smith. Shelley runs the Justice for Ritzy Facebook group and has been a vocal advocate in the movement to find Derek. It was Shelley who originally reached out to us to cover Derek's case. As an additional content warning, this episode speaks about drug addiction and a theory of a graphic murder involving a wood chipper.
Derek Ritz was born in London, Ontario on June 6, 1965. He grew up in London with his mom, dad, and one sister. Not a lot is known about Derek's early life. Much of the information that Kerry and Please Bring Me Home have learned about Derek has come through his best friend, Phil. What we have learned is that for a long time, Derek and his family had a fairly normal life in London, Ontario. London at that time was part of Canada's manufacturing heartland. It was not uncommon to be able to leave school, get a manufacturing job in a car plant, and buy your first home. However, after Derek's parents divorced, that all changed. Derek's mom remarried, and things started to go downhill for Derek. As a child and then a teen, tensions with this new stepdad turned abusive. Later in life, Derek would share with friends that the family home was filled with alcohol abuse as well as violence. According to Kerry, at the age of 16, Derek made the choice to leave home.
Mom and Derek's stepfather became vicious alcoholics. The abuse in the home started shortly after the relationship bonded between the mom and the stepdad. And the abuse became very physical against Derek. I don't know if there was abuse with his sister. We don't have any information on that. But the addictions was seriously, he rarely spoke of his childhood. But when he did, he said that the abuse was unspeakable. And when he left London at the age of 16, he had no further contact with his parents. And he hitchhiked to Seaforth. So this is at age 16. He hitchhiked to Seaforth, he bought a tent, and he never went back.
So at just 16 years old, Derek Ritz hitchhiked from London, Ontario to Seaforth, Ontario. He left London without a plan. The only belongings he had fit into a backpack, and this included a camping tent. Seaforth is a small town of about 3,000 people located 73 kilometers from London. Once he arrived in Seaforth, he began to live in his tent on the streets and in parks. It was around this time that his best friend Phil's older brother found Derek on the streets and took him under his wing.
His best friend brother, so Phil's brother, found him one day in his tent, living on his own. He gave him a tongue lashing and told him to get a job, that he needed to better himself and he needed to get out of that tent and have some sort of structure for himself. So he did. He started working for Mitchell Standard Products at the age of 18 and later was transferred to a plant in Stratford. So that's how he moved on, fended for himself, was absolutely a loner, but was able to get a job and was able to commit to that job. But that job is what got him eventually to Stratford. From that point, moving to Stratford, we don't know of any time where he ever moved away from Stratford. So his teen life was originally in the lower teens in his family home. But at age 16, he took it upon himself to find something better.
So thanks to the guidance of a well-intentioned friend, Derek began to make some positive choices. He took a job with Mitchell Standard Products, which we believe made vibrational control systems in the automotive industry. Through this new job, Derek moved to Stratford, Ontario.
Stratford, Ontario is renowned for its vibrant art scene, most notably the Stratford Festival, which is one of the largest and most prestigious theater festivals in North America. Founded in 1953, this festival primarily showcases Shakespearean plays, but also includes modern works, musicals, and other classic theater pieces. Stratford is also famous for being the hometown of Justin Bieber, who began his musical career performing on the streets of the city before eventually rising to international fame. The city's strong commitment to the arts has made it a cultural hub, attracting tourists, performers, and artists from around the world. Geographically, Stratford is located in southwestern Ontario, about 150 kilometers west of Toronto along the Avon River. This adds to the city's charm with its scenic riverbanks and parklands. Stratford's location makes it easily accessible by road and rail, and its combination of small-town charm with modern amenities make it appealing to both residents and visitors alike. While Stratford has a population of around 32,000 people, it maintains a close-knit community feel. When it comes to crime, Stratford does enjoy a reputation as a safe and peaceful community, though it does face challenges like any growing town. The city's crime rates are generally lower than the provincial average, with most incidents being nonviolent, such as property crimes. The police jurisdiction for Stratford, Ontario is served by the Stratford Police Service, or the SPS. We will touch more on the crime in Stratford a little later in the episode, but for now, let's go back and learn more about Derek Ritz. So things seem to stabilize for a time for Derek. Keep in mind, only a short time earlier, he was a teenager living in a tent on the side of the road. But now he found himself a young man with a good job and his own apartment. He was paying rent and paying his bills, and at one point he even had a girlfriend, and the two of them had a son together.
From what I know, Derek was never married. He lived common law with a woman. Now, preface that by saying Derek never had many girlfriends. He was not a womanizer. He was not a woman chaser. He liked to do his own thing. He liked to hang out with his one buddy, Phil. But he did fall in love a couple times. And one time he lived common law with a woman in Stratford and had a beautiful son. But eventually, the addiction impacted the household in such a way where he had to move out. And he became homeless again at that time. And the mom of the son raised the boy and did a phenomenal job. He's an incredible human today, has his own family. But she had to take a stand and say that he couldn't be part of that home life at that time. So he had a son. He did struggle at times to break out of the addiction so that he could focus on a relationship with his son, but very quickly fell back.
Despite Derek's work to create a stable life for himself, he was still a kid who came from a violent home where alcohol played a significant factor in the abuse that he experienced. It was during this time that addiction became a part of Derek's life as well. First, it was alcohol and what Kerry describes as a work-to-party lifestyle.
At the beginning, his life had more meaning, essentially. He was trying to make it better. So he had got an apartment in Stratford. He was able to pay the rent for his apartment. He was able to pay the bills. However, work became the work to party mentality as he started to easily fall into addiction based on whether it's genetic issues, relationship issues, the trauma that he experienced growing up. His first fall was into addiction. He was starting to drink. So work became, as Phil said, it became work to party. He would go to work. He would be able to hold his own at his job. He would leave. From the point he left his job, it was to get high, to get drugs, and to drink. And whatever it was, he could get his hands on. He would get 5 to 6 hours sleep at night. And then he'd go to work the next day. Many times he would end up at work intoxicated, high, as a lot of weed that he was using at that time. So his state was never without some sort of substance while he was working. And that continued to just snowball and get worse as he was going through his 20s and 30s.
So unfortunately, in the mid-90s, so around 95 and 96, this is when hard drugs came into the picture for Derek, specifically meth. And that's when life started to go very downhill for Derek.
So what many people, including ourselves, may not know about Stratford, Ontario, was that beneath the art, the theater, and the tree-lined historic streets lies a dark secret. For decades now, Stratford, Ontario has had a vicious meth problem. So in the late 90s, allegedly a man named Daniel McCool, a millwright and a blue-collar worker, brought the recipes and means of production of methamphetamine to Stratford, Ontario, and things exploded. Previously, McCool was living in Texas, but was deported back to Canada for possession and production of methamphetamine. Once in Stratford, multiple labs were set up, and the police began to see a massive increase in meth possession, meth use, crime related to meth, and meth labs in the area. For those who are unaware, crystal meth is incredibly cheap and very addictive. The drug is an upper, so for those working in factories, manufacturing, heavy industries, the drug can seem appealing. However, the thing about meth is that the positives are eventually outweighed by the negatives. What was once a little bump of meth to get you through your night shift quickly becomes a pretty serious addiction. Along with the addiction can come psychosis and other major health issues. And it seems that the effects of crystal meth appealed to Derek, and it eventually took over his life. While he tried to hold on to those things in life that gave him stability, like a home, a girlfriend, a job, and a child, eventually the addiction took over. It is a story that we have seen played out in small towns and cities across Canada. We are sure that there are people who are listening to this episode who have been affected by drug addiction, either through a loved one, a friend, or even themselves.
Meth is I hate to say drug of choice because I don't like that phrase, but essentially the drug of choice in Stratford. There was an individual who went from Stratford down to Texas years ago, learned how to make meth, came up to Stratford, and he was the big dude making meth in that area. So that was the drug of choice. And so in the mid-90s, he started to get hooked on meth. But yes, meth has just eaten up the communities in this area and across Canada.
Even as addiction took its toll on Derek, he managed to hold on to 3 key aspects of his life: his job, his apartment, and his friendship with Phil. Although he became well known in the meth scene, he did maintain the appearance of someone functioning despite his addiction.
He was functioning from the perspective that he could hold a job, but he was well known in the meth community. So he would hang around downtown. He would hang around with inappropriate individuals. He would have the connection with people he needed to get the drugs from. But people said he was fun. He was nice. He would give you anything. Like so many individuals who are stuck in these addictions, they would give you the last shirt they have. He would give you anything, except when he was drinking. When he was drinking, he would become cocky. He would say what he thought. He would become a little more aggressive in his speech, not in his physical behavior. And it was when he would get in situations and say things to people that had no filter, he would get beat up multiple times. He would never fight back. He would be the one that was beaten up. If his friend Phil was with him, Phil was able to protect him. Phil wouldn't allow that those things happen. Phil would sort of mentor and be the filter for Derek. But if Phil wasn't around, Derek would get himself into trouble.
In the early days of Derek's addiction, he did not have a criminal record. As time went on and his addiction deepened, he became more well-known to the police, but still did not have any significant charges on his record. Things started to catch up with Derek at work. Several times he was intoxicated while on the job. It's not uncommon after using meth during the evening to then use alcohol or downers in the morning to stabilize yourself before heading to work. And sometimes it's easy to overshoot the mark between taking the edge off and being intoxicated. Unfortunately, in 2016, after multiple issues at work, Derek was given a 2-week suspension. Perhaps he saw the writing on the wall or was just tired of working, but Derek made the decision to not return to work. He had worked at Mitchell Standard Products for 30 years. This is not a small accomplishment. For many years, he was a well-respected and loved employee, but in 2016, he asked the company for a buyout. The amount of money that Derek received from the company is unknown, but Derek didn't just walk away from the job. It would appear that he walked away from his life.
So we know in spring approximately of 2016, he walked away from his job. He was suspended for 2 weeks for what we believe is being impaired at work. And he took the 2 weeks and then he decided to never go back to that job. He was fighting with the company for a payout, whatever that may be. But essentially, when he walked away from his job, he walked away from his apartment. He had a storage unit that he would keep things in. He walked away from that storage unit, walked away from the job. And according to that time, he became essentially unhoused. He would couch surf here and there. He would stay in different locations. In the summer, he'd sleep in a tent with friends. But as the end of the summer happened, autumn came, it was starting to get colder. He went to stay at a friend's house, a friend in the community who was also involved in the same addictions that Derek was involved in.
During the spring and summer of 2016, Derek lived on the streets of Stratford, Ontario. He had given up his job, his apartment, his storage locker, and many of his belongings. For a while, he had a bicycle, but that was stolen at one point. As winter approached, Derek knew that he had to move indoors. It was around this time that his good friend Phil left the area to move north. He ended up splitting his time between two homes. Now, this is very important when it comes to the timeline of his disappearance. So there was one home in Stratford that was a known meth house. Derek would spend his days and nights in the basement of that house, often using meth. This house was frequented by other meth users. The main occupants of the home were also heavily into that scene. For the rest of this episode, we will call this house the Stratford home. So while at the Stratford home, Derek would use meth and other drugs. This was not a safe place to be, and it was a house that was known to the Stratford Police. There was another home that Derek would stay at in the nearby town of Sebringville. We will call that the Sebringville home. So the owner of the Sebringville home was a friend of Derek's. The two had met through working at Mitchell's. Now, this man seemed to have Derek's best interests at heart, and he did his best to give Derek a couch and a warm, dry place to sleep. But while using, Derek would be a little bit too much to handle at times, and eventually the owner of that house had one hard rule for Derek. He could stay at the Sebringville home, but when he was there, he wasn't allowed to use meth.
That's right. His friend would not allow him to be there if he was on meth. Derek would become a little more erratic, a little more paranoid. He'd become a little more aggressive and fidgety. Not aggressive from the perspective of he would attack someone, but it was just more fidgety and anxious. His friend didn't want him there like that. His friend currently wasn't involved in drugs and didn't want Derek there with that behavior. And the need for alcohol when he was like that is he would just go in the kitchen and he would open a fridge, go into cabinets, go anywhere to try to find a bottle of wine or anything with any alcohol content that was in it. And he would grab it and he would take it, so the owner of that house just couldn't have that behavior, couldn't go with things missing, couldn't go to sleep because he didn't know what was going to happen. But he still enjoyed his friend. So, Derek had to just go where he was accepted at that point.
So when Derek was using, he would stay at the Stratford home. And when he was taking a break, he would stay at his friend's house in Sebringville or the Sebringville home. As stated, Derek's bike had been stolen, so sometimes he would hitchhike between the locations. But most often, Derek would walk the 8 kilometers between Sebringville and Stratford. Now, this walk would take up to about 2 hours.
In most missing persons cases we cover, there's usually a clear timeline of events. But Derek was living with no fixed address, making it harder to track his movements. His best friend Phil, who had moved away, was no longer looking out for him, and in truth, very few people were keeping tabs on Derek at all. So instead of a traditional timeline, this case starts with 2 missing persons reports being called into 2 different police agencies in 2 different towns. On January 6, 2017, a woman who lived at the Stratford home messaged Phil on Facebook asking if he had heard from Derek. Phil told this woman that he had not heard from Derek and that she should contact the police. Oddly, instead of contacting the Stratford Police, she phoned the Ontario Provincial Police, who were located in Sebringville. For Sebringville, Ontario, it's a smaller community located just outside of Stratford, and policing services are provided by the Ontario Provincial Police, or the OPP. Sebringville falls under the OPP's jurisdiction because it's a rural area that just does not have its own municipal police force. Phil then contacted the Sebringville homeowner to see if he had heard from Derek. The Sebringville homeowner replied that he had not seen Derek in several days, so Phil encouraged him to also contact the police. Also oddly, the Sebringville homeowner contacted the Stratford Police located in Stratford rather than the OPP located in Sebringville. Are you confused? So are we. So we asked Kerry for some clarification on this part of the story.
So the individuals of the home in Stratford reported the missing persons to Sebringville OPP. Phil, his best friend, then contacted the Sebringville residents to see if maybe Derek was there. Phil spoke to the owner of that residence. He said, no, he hasn't been here for days. And so this owner contacted Stratford Police Department. Two different police agencies. Sebringville is in the OPP region. Stratford is in the city of Stratford Police. Which is interesting why these individuals contacted two different police agencies. And according to information, each police agency received a different story. What that story is, I don't know, and I don't have access to that. However, Sebringville OPP took the lead in the case initially. They conducted searches around the house in Sebringville. That includes the backyard of the site. It includes a small stream that goes beside and behind the property in Sebringville. Allegedly, they recovered some clothes, but it was never made known public whether they were Derek's clothes or had anything to do with the investigation. So a little mixed up as far as who was reporting him where. There's allegations that he was last seen in Sebringville, and there's other allegations that he was last seen in Stratford.
From the very beginning, the investigation into Derek's disappearance was hampered. First, there was a delay in reporting him missing. Then there was the fact that no one knew the exact date that he disappeared. Then, there were multiple reports to two jurisdictions. And lastly, there were conflicting stories and sightings. Eventually, the OPP issued the following press release that was published by the CBC on January 25, 2017. In this article, it was made clear that Derek was last seen in the early morning hours of New Year's Eve. The article goes on to say, the provincial police say a 51-year-old man is still missing despite their best efforts to find him. On Wednesday, the OPP published a plea asking for the public's help in finding Derek Ritz, who remains missing despite a combined search effort that lasted 26 days by officers on the ground and in the sky using the OPP airplane. Investigators say Ritz was last seen in the Avonton Road area of Sebringville, a small town northwest of Stratford, in the early morning hours of December 31st, 2016. The article then goes on to describe what Derek looks like and what he was wearing. Now, to this day, Derek remains missing. We are now going to take a quick break to hear from our sponsors. When we return, we will learn how Please Bring Me Home became involved in this case, what they have learned, and where the investigation sits today. And we are back. So before the break, we established that Derek Ritz was last seen in the early morning hours of December 31st, 2016. In the early days of the investigation, the file was being handled by the OPP out of Sebringville. But that changed yet again when the file was transferred to the municipal police force in Stratford, Ontario. We asked Kerry from Please Bring Me Home what she has learned about the early days of the investigation.
After the OPP did some preliminary searching, which we don't know the details of, the case was transferred fully to Stratford Police Department. Stratford Police Department then took the case over. However, they only had one officer over the missing persons unit who was also in charge of many other roles within the Stratford PD. Very little, according to our knowledge, was done on the case until Please Bring Me Home came into the picture and we started to ask questions. And that was in 2020.
While it seems that the investigation had slowed down from a law enforcement perspective, things were starting to pick up online. Very early on, an acquaintance of Derek's, Shelley Smith, became interested in the case. She was concerned that Derek's story was not getting the attention it deserved, so Shelley started the Facebook group Justice for Ritzy, a group that she has been the administrator of since January 19th, 2017. After years of advocating for Derek and realizing the investigation had gone cold, Shelley reached out to Please Bring Me Home. The file was assigned to Kerry at Please Bring Me Home in October of 2020. Kerry walked us through the early foray into the case.
Yes. So when I got the case in October of 2020, our first step through Please Bring Me Home is to contact the detectives overseeing the case. And that is out of respect and out of courtesy, and also to create an excellent line of communication. It is a one-way relationship. I give, they keep, and that's okay. So I reached out to the detective over the case, introduced myself, asked for a Zoom call that we could go over where we're at. Very receptive to us working on the case, very open, was able to state we have not had any leads to go on in this case. Therefore, no searches have been conducted, which was disappointing, but in the same breath, clean canvas to work on, and let's start doing this. The first step for us was to obtain any open source information that we could get. Was of interest is, I believe it's 3 months after Derek went missing. Said house in Stratford, where Derek was living in the basement, burned down. It burned down and the fire started in the basement, which is very interesting. Could it have been coincidental? Absolutely, it could have been. At that point, the owner of that home moved out of Stratford and has been sort of transient since that, and sadly has fallen even more deep into the meth addiction.
So with the Stratford house burnt to the ground and the homeowners in the wind, Kerry began reaching out to various family members and people from the community that Derek was a part of. Pieces of a story began to emerge about a party, a beating, and even a murder. These interviews gave Please Bring Me Home a starting point, which eventually resulted in 5 searches. Unfortunately, nothing was found.
So we were able to get information about that fire. We started to interview. I interviewed the ex-partner, interviewed the son, started to interview Shelley, who has been a strong advocate for Derek's cause since inception. She was the one who actually submitted the case to Please Bring Me Home. And the interviews just started to flood in. It was a matter of just stepping into that community, starting to ask the questions. A lot of people wanted to talk. A lot of people would call me and not provide a name and say, this is what I know. And as you know, many times in these cases, rumors flood. And as rumors flood the narrative, there is a string of truth in each of those rumors. And so it was up to us to try to sew together the story. I've done about 60 interviews. We've done 5 searches. The searches are areas where we believe there may have been an altercation with Derek. So those were the searches that we've performed. There's still a couple outstanding.
After over 100 tips and interviews conducted by Please Bring Me Home, a story began to emerge about what may have happened to Derek Ritz. When you first hear it, it sounds like a scene from the Coen brothers movie Fargo. But in reality, this is much more horrific than a fictional movie. Kerry has learned that on New Year's Eve, Derek began walking from the Sebringville home headed towards Stratford. Allegedly, a phone call was made by someone who is currently nameless. Now, this person called some individuals and told them that Derek could be found on the road. The time is now around 3 a.m.
So, among over 100 tips and interviews, the prominent rumor that repeats itself over and over is thus. So, on New Year's Eve, 2016, a tip came in that said that the individuals, and there were a few at the house in Stratford, wanted to beat Derek up. There was an altercation about the money that he had allegedly from the payout at his company, even though many who know him believe that that money was long gone. But there was a perception that he had money. So what is said is that the individuals at the Stratford home were tipped off that Derek was just starting to walk from the residence in Sebringville back to Stratford at approximately 3 a.m. in the morning. So they received this tip. They got into a vehicle and they drove to Sebringville. They turned down the road that they knew that Derek would be walking along, and they came across Derek on the road. They stopped. They were driving what we believe was a red burgundy, large sedan, four-door. And they stopped, and the driver and the passenger got out of the vehicle, approached Derek, and grabbed him and threw him in the trunk. They got back in the vehicle and drove towards a known farm in the area, a farm where individuals would go and gather, do meth, drink. All the while, Derek was yelling from the trunk and allegedly kicking or pounding on the back seats of the car.
So Derek is allegedly beaten and abducted on the side of the road between Sebringville and Stratford. He's placed into the trunk of the car and driven to a remote farm where a party is in full swing. According to the rumors, Derek is then pulled out of the car and presented to the group, where they continued to viciously beat him.
Once arriving at the farm, the car went to the barn, which is in the back of the farm. Derek was pulled out of the trunk and he was brought into the barn. And in the barn, allegedly, there was a bunch of people who were doing different forms of drugs, drinking, and having quite a New Year's celebration in the barn. Derek was brought in and he was thrown on the ground. He was kicked. They spat on him. When he would try to get up, they would hit him, take him down again. Allegedly, they pulled off his jacket that he had on while in the vehicle and kicked him and threw him down. At one point, one of the kicks to the head actually rendered him unconscious. Partying continued. People were watching and partying. Only 3 to 4 individuals that we know of actually partook in the action of the abuse against Derek. After a time, which we don't know how long this time was, we were told that Derek was taken outside of the barn door and was essentially met with his death.
The rumor or prevailing theory, depending on how you view it, continues on outside of the barn. And we need to forewarn our listeners, what you're about to hear is quite graphic.
The rumors state that, albeit as gruesome and horrific as it sounds, every rumor we get says that Derek was put in a wood chipper that was prepared outside of the barn door, that was put over a tarp, and he was put through that wood chipper feet first and alive. And the rumors state that that is how Derek met his death, essentially on January 1st of 2017. According to the rumors and tips, these individuals were prepared with appropriate clothing so that their other clothes would not be stained or marked in any way. They discarded those outer garments outside, went back into the barn, and the celebration continued. He was allegedly left out there, we know deceased, if in fact that's what happened to him. And no one knows at this point what exactly happened after that. At about 6 o'clock in the morning, individuals drove back into Stratford. Everyone went to their home. At that point, the rumors state that later that morning, the individuals who committed the heinous attack went back to clean up.
So, a murder of this magnitude would leave quite a bit of forensic evidence and should be easy to investigate. But keep in mind, you have terrified witnesses and a massive delay in reporting Derek missing. And then there was all of the handling of the investigation off the top that went between two jurisdictions. Add to this equation that the alleged murder occurred on a private property that has, as far as we know, never been searched in the last 7 years. Kerry has heard other rumors on how the evidence was covered up and how Derek's remains were disposed of.
To this day, no one has been able to identify where any, if any, remains of Derek Ritz are today. There are rumors that acid was used. There were rumors that he was put in a barrel and it was sealed and it was dumped. There were rumors that the tarp was gathered together and then dumped in a river. So all these rumors come forward, but we don't have any tips or security around what happened after that night. So it makes it very difficult because prosecution in Canada without a body is a very new approach. We know in the States that they've had great success in prosecuting without a body, but in Canada, it happens, but it's very rare and very difficult. I'm fairly certain as to who was involved that night, as the rumors, 95% of the rumors say the exact same people were involved that night. We're fairly certain as to what happened with Derek.
The team at Please Bring Me Home is careful to investigate all possible theories. While they have consistently received tips supporting the murder theory that you just heard, they remain open-minded. Could Derek have left his life voluntarily? Was there an accident, an overdose, or perhaps even suicide? These are all possibilities Please Bring Me Home has explored. In fact, investigators have gone to great lengths to investigate every sighting of Derek Ritz.
No, we absolutely have to have multiple theories in every case, because as soon as we get blinded by one theory, we miss signs and tips and red flags about others. So yes, we absolutely have kept a theory open that could he still be alive? We've received tips. I saw him in Hamilton. We did an investigation. Even Stratford PD went in to interview the tipster who said that they saw him in Toronto. We worked on that tip as well. Disproven. Absolutely, it was not him. Multiple tips. We've had tips from Edmonton. We follow up on every single tip. We do not leave one unfound. I worked a case, and this is outside of this, but I worked a case where an individual went missing from Niagara Falls area, was last seen in Toronto. It was assumed that he was involved in drugs, that he was deceased somewhere. And I found him in Florida.
With all of the sightings ruled out, we are left with suicide or potentially an accident of some sort. Now, we all know that signs of suicide or suicidal ideation present differently with each individual. But for now, suicide is not the prevailing theory in Derek's disappearance.
Could it be suicide? Right? Did he have anything that would have led him to that point? And it is not a leading theory in this case, but it still is a theory, because until it is disproven, it is removed as a theory. So Derek never discussed suicide. He never attempted it. It's not someone who said, oh, he's tried it 4 times, but just couldn't follow through. But only God knows the truth.
So that leaves an accident. Derek was last seen walking down the road between Sebringville and Stratford. Could he have been disoriented and got lost? Could he be the victim of a hit and run? Please Bring Me Home did do searches up and down that stretch of road and did not find any evidence of an accident, but just like suicide and all the other theories, it can't be ruled out.
We can't rule out that he fell down a ravine. He went hiking, right? We searched the whole route from Sebringville to Stratford. There was 2 routes. One was a county road, one was the main road. We walked ditches. We walked the whole area around there. No sighting. It's all farmland that is plowed frequently. But yeah, we have to always and will keep theories open. Do we believe it was suicide? No, absolutely not. But we will keep it on the table because we don't know exactly what happened to Derek.
While Kerry's team has generated many tips, they still need those last pieces of the puzzle that could hopefully provide the answers that they seek regarding Derek's disappearance. Please Bring Me Home focuses on finding individuals or their remains. They do not prosecute crime. However, if criminality exists, that information can help law enforcement to perhaps bring justice for Derek Ritz.
Where we're really struggling with all of this is we need evidence to support the theories, as in any case. We always manage multiple theories, but it's very difficult in this case. If it was premeditated, which we believe it was, what happened after? And did that exactly happen? We need more evidence and people to come forward and say, you know what, I was there too. There's about 4 people that I believe know more than what they're willing to share. One individual who owned the house in Stratford has become very transient and disassociated himself socially. I think he knows a lot. I tried to meet with him once, and I was about half an hour away from the town he lived in, and he called and he canceled. He said he couldn't do it. They're scared. They're scared of the couple individuals who have threatened the community into silence. And what we need to remember is it could be you next. Without even talking, it could be you next. We know that these individuals have seriously harmed many people who have just been in their way, have been between them and a bottle of vodka. Right? So we need to ensure that these individuals are brought off the streets and secured for a long time.
It has been almost 8 years since Derek Ritz went missing. The impact of his disappearance has been felt by those close to him as well as the greater community of Stratford, Ontario. Derek's best friend, Phil, wonders what might have been if he had stayed in Stratford to keep an eye on Derek.
Oh, that's such a good question. So many times we don't talk about those left behind in these scenarios and the impact on them. I first wanted to talk about Derek's best friend, Phil. Phil has been a consistent advocate for Derek from day one. I've never met Phil. They call him Gypsy Phil. He is a strong individual who was a true friend to Derek for countless years. As soon as he heard that Derek was missing, he came to Stratford from the north to look for his friend. He spoke to countless people, went to locations, spoke to the different police departments involved, and has continued to support the investigation to this day. I was running a canine team one day, and I needed a scent. And before I knew it, Phil had put one of Derek's hats in a enclosed envelope and sent it to me. You know, with Phil, it's what you need, you have it now. He is articulate. He is kind. But Phil is devastated. Phil feels guilty. You know, if he says, if I hadn't have moved away, would Derek still be alive today? You know, he was Derek's protector. He was his best friend. It's what we call survivor's guilt. You know, he completely is constantly reliving what he could have, should have done for Derek. But he did everything a best friend should do. He guided Derek. He counseled Derek. He mentored him. He helped try to keep him clean. He saved him from fights. He was just a good guy who tried to help Derek make life right. I honor Phil tremendously.
Shelley Smith has worked tirelessly to be the face of the Justice for Ritzy movement. Without her, Please Bring Me Home would never have been involved, and Derek's story would have faded from the headlines. She too has been impacted by Derek's disappearance.
Talk about Shelley. So Shelley is the one who started to advocate in Stratford for Derek. Shelley never met Derek, never knew him. Shelley's sister was a friend of Derek. And I don't know to this day what came across Shelley to encourage her to do this. Shelley is sober herself. Many years of addiction. She knows that community extremely well. She's lived in that community for a long time. But she has never quit. She has been relentless in advocacy with police, with Please Bring Me Home, with community agencies. She does chalk drawings by the police station. Don't forget about Derek. She puts posters up everywhere. She does a walk on his birthday. She's really kept his memory alive for many people. But she's been targeted. She's been harassed. She's been bullied. At one point, she's just said, I can't do this anymore. But then she reflected and she said, well, look what Derek went through. Yeah, I can do this. And we don't need this happening in our community. So I honor her.
Derek's case has also revealed a dark underbelly that has been present in Stratford for far too long. But the silence is breaking.
As you know, Stratford is an internationally known community for its theater. Stratford theater people come in the summer from all countries around the world. You see the busloads of them going down the 401. Everyone knows Stratford because of Justin Bieber. So it's a beautiful, quaint town that of its appearance is absolutely stunning and beautiful. But what we don't know is that we have murders masked as ODs in the community. They become a prevalent cause of death. Meth has taken over. Other drugs have taken a stronghold in the communities, and that meth and other drugs is becoming larger and more profitable. We have to remain aware, and we have to demand accountability within the community. We need to take that veil off sometimes so that we can expose the evil and extinguish the evil, essentially. I have to say, Stratford Police have absolutely been incredible. You know, for the small police force that they are, the detective over the case has done a lot. He is receptive to information. They do their own searches. They've done hundreds of interviews.
As always, we like to provide our audience with ways to help out in the cases that we cover. So we asked Kerry how our listeners can help.
Number one, listeners make such a difference in the ability to share knowledge. Knowledge is power. And the more knowledge that we have in Canada of these missing persons, of marginalized families falling victim to this, the more we can do as a community. So first and foremost, I'm so grateful for what you do and for the phenomenal audience that you do have, because they're people that care. And that's huge. If our listeners know of anyone who has information relating to Derek Ritz, to what happened to him, to where his remains, what happened that night, please talk to me. You know, you don't have to give me your name. You absolutely do not. You can contact Please Bring Me Home's website, and there is a link to an email tip, or you can phone in a tip. If you want to talk about it further without giving me your name, that's fine. Just tell me when I can call you. I won't look up your cell phone. I know it's scary. I won't. All I want is your knowledge. I want to know what you know. But if you want, just send me a note through tips and tell us your knowledge. Share with us what you know.
We ask that you share this episode as well as our social media posts about Derek Ritz. You can also join the Facebook group Justice for Ritzy, which we will share in the show notes of this episode. Derek Ritz lived a difficult life and found himself struggling with addiction. Despite his challenging upbringing, he worked his way from being a 16-year-old runaway living in a tent to being a long-term employee with an apartment. 30 years later, when his addiction got the upper hand, he went missing. Whether Derek vacated his life by accident or on purpose, or whether he was the victim of a horrendous homicide, does not change the fact that he does deserve to be found.
I really hope that Derek's case can be seen as an example of how we will hold everyone, regardless what socioeconomic situation they come from. We hold them of utmost regard, and we will do everything we can to find them.
Derek Ritz was last seen in the Avonton Road area of Sebringville, northwest of Stratford, Ontario, in the early morning hours of December 31st, 2016 into January 1st, 2017. Police described Derek as 5 foot 11 inches tall, 170 pounds, with long shoulder-length brown hair. He has brown eyes and a tattoo on his right forearm of a woman with a snake. He was last seen wearing blue jeans, a dark-colored shirt, and a leather motorcycle jacket. Police say he is possibly carrying an orange backpack. Derek was known to frequent Sebringville and the city of Stratford and usually traveled on foot when traveling between those two locations. Anyone with any information on what happened to Derek is asked to call Stratford Police at 519-271-4141. Anonymous tips can be submitted through Crime Stoppers at 1-800-222-8477. If you'd like more information on this case, as well as the Please Bring Me Home tip line to provide information on Derek's case or any other cases of missing persons, we will link their website in the show notes of this episode. We would like to thank Shelley Smith for her hard work and for reaching out to us about Derek's case. We would also like to send a big thank you to Kerry and Please Bring Me Home for trusting us to tell Derek's story. We have worked with Please Bring Me Home on a few episodes now. We also participated in 2 ground searches organized by their investigators. They do amazing work, and we are grateful for the relationship with them. We'd invite you to go follow them on social media. If you have a case suggestion for us, you can send it to truenorthtruecrime@gmail.com. We do prioritize cases that come from family members or close contacts of the case. If you'd like more True North True Crime, you can subscribe to TNTC Plus on Apple Podcasts or on Patreon. For $5 a month, you will receive early release on Mondays instead of Thursdays, ad-free listening, and monthly bonus content. You can also try TNTC Plus with a 7-day free trial on Apple. As always, we will see you every other Thursday with a new episode. So until then, stay safe, everyone.
Stay safe.